Greetings and welcome to Fresh Fire International Ministries. This is our Wisdom Wednesday inspirational message for you. I'm Pastor Janice Fareed Hardy, and the title of my message is Mrs. Billups Taught Me Everything I Need to Know in Life. Now, Jesus told the disciples before he ascended to heaven, and I'm reading Acts 1, verse 8. But you will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes on you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth. Often we think that the term witness means grand evangelistic efforts, boldly quoting the scriptures and sharing miraculous testimonies of what Jesus did in the Bible and has done in our lives. Yet, sometimes being a witness is much simpler than that. It can be as uncomplicated as living a genuine Christian life and allowing others, even a 5-year-old girl, to see Jesus in you, reflected in you. So let me share a personal story to explain this. As a child, I spent about a month or so with my grandmother in the South, getting a real taste of Southern living. This was several decades ago, obviously when I was 5 years old. I deeply admired my grandparents for their hard work and their unwavering faith, even in seemingly impossible situations. And they had a lot of those. Their lives left a lasting impression on me. However, one woman who wasn't a relative had a great impact in shaping my understanding of Jesus also, and that was Mrs. Billups. Mrs. Billups was a friend of my grandmother. She lived in a rural area where neighbors were often the next door neighbor was like a quarter or so of a mile away. But despite this distance, this close-knit community stayed connected. They would share news through those old-fashioned, what they would call party lines, where anyone could pick up and hear your conversation. And also through regular visits, they would visit one another, and also through the church, which was the center of their lives in that rural area. Mrs. Billups lived far from the church, yet she was there for every service. I believe she cared for her young grandson, who was always by her side. My little relatives, other little kiddies like me, and often our job would be to walk over to Mrs. Phillips' home, and like I said, it could be over a quarter of a mile away, and deliver extra food from my grandmother. Now that was the way they survived, and it was much like the Acts church appears to have been in Acts 4:32, where believers shared everything they had. And I want to read that for you, okay? All the believers were one in heart and mind. No one claimed that any of his possessions was his own, but they shared everything they had. Now, each Sunday in this rural town, the church was the center of our lives. Even those who rarely attended would dress up and come for those special occasions, Christmas celebrations, and definitely for Easter. The neighborhood children were expected to attend Sunday school, not the adults so much, but Sunday school. The kids had to be there, and we would have to stay through the main service and even afterwards as the adults handled their church, business responsibilities. All we little ones, all that we really wanted to do was just go spend our little pennies and dimes that our family gave us. We wanted to go spend it on candy at the only store that was in town. But we had to wait until the adults did everything they needed to do. But one of the biggest problems with Sunday school, it was not the lessons, okay? It wasn't. The problem was Mrs. Billups. Okay, Mrs. Billups was a problem, okay? Number one, she was the first one there all the time. And number two, she would get up and she would sing a particular song at the start of Sunday school, the same song every week. Now, to my young ears, it felt like her song lasted for hours, although I know it didn't. It was the only time in my life that I have ever heard that song. And to this day, I still remember the words. Okay, and it went something like this. What you doing lying on a Sunday, ain't it a shame? What you doing lying on a Sunday, ain't it a shame? When you got Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, all day Saturday. What you doing lying on a Sunday, ain't it a shame? Then she would proceed to sing the same thing about every sin in the Bible, including some sins that none of us have ever heard of. But to this day, I haven't even heard of some of those sins she'd be singing about. But no one could, and no one would stop her from getting up there and singing her song. And it's funny that after many decades, I still remember Mrs. Billups and her song, even though I grew up in the North and didn't attend church or become a Christian until over 30 years later. But yet, in hindsight and looking through my Christian eyes now, Mrs. Billups unintentionally taught me invaluable lessons about life and faith. Number one, Mrs. Billups knew what some pastors only learned recently during the COVID shutdown, and that is sing your song, give your message, sing your song, even without an audience. There were times when we would arrive, the little kiddies, we would arrive because we would go to church by ourselves. It was safe then. We would arrive at the church, and Mrs. Billups was already there, and she would be singing her song, What You Doing, to an empty room. She sang just as passionately when it was empty as she did when there were people around. The Bible shows us that when Jesus faced the most challenging moments, he prayed alone in that garden of Gethsemane. So there may be times when we have to walk our faith journey alone. There may be times when the only one who hears our message on our hearts or our heart's cry is really our Heavenly Father. It's essential to believe in ourselves and in God's constant presence, his constant presence with us. We have to learn to stir up our own gift, as it says in 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 6. Number 2, I'd learned from Mrs. Billups, don't wait for perfection. Don't wait for perfection. If you wait for everything to be perfect before living your life or sharing your song, your life song, you'll never truly be all that God intended for you to be. Mrs. Billups sang with passion and determination, even though I guarantee you she was way, way, way off key, way off pitch. But her heart was in it. Ecclesiastes chapter 11, verse 4 reads like this. Whoever watches the wind will not plant. Because if you're watching for the wind to stop, if you're waiting for the most perfect, weather conditions, you will never plant, okay? And it continues, whoever looks at the clouds will not reap. If you're waiting until there are no clouds, in the sky, just in case you don't want it to rain while you're out there reaping or pulling in what you have grown. If you wait for perfect conditions, you will never get the bounty that God has waiting for you. Don't wait for ideal conditions, okay? Step out in faith, knowing that you are good enough, knowing that conditions are good enough because God is alive in you, around you, and all about you and for you. The Jesus in you makes you good enough to deal with whatever situations, whatever conditions you've got to deal with. So Mrs. Billups didn't care that people knew she really was off key, okay? All right? She was good enough. And also, God uses us to plant seeds. As a young elementary school girl, I was just, kindergarten or something? I never had a conversation with Mrs. Billups, but I sensed her struggles. Each time we walked, us little kitties walked to her home to deliver food, I would see her grandson and her goat. No doubt the goat was, to provide milk, okay, and probably also to help her with whatever little things she could grow in the earth, okay, to row, to pull the hoe or help her row or whatever. And it's so funny to me today when I think of that goat back then. It was very strange to me, especially being a northerner. But today, it's funny how many people consider goat milk and goat yogurt to be health conscious foods, okay? Eating well, getting really nutritiously packed foods. But when I went to Mrs. Billups, home with the little kitties, I would see no one else there, ever. I don't know how she made it through the tornadoes and the floods that plagued her low-lying remote home. And in reality, we do know how she made it, by the grace of God. We know she got over by the grace of God. But despite her hardships, okay, despite it all, she kept pushing on. She kept demonstrating immense faith. God was working through her even when she did not realize it. And we know God was keeping her, okay, through it all. Her unwavering presence, okay, and song planted seeds of faith in me that really lie dormant for many decades, but finally decades later sprouted, and they're even strong today. Decades later, that woman planted seeds in me, and she didn't even know she was doing that. I didn't either, obviously. Okay, Mrs. Billups, through her simple yet profound acts of faith and her unwavering commitment to singing her song, okay, left an indelible mark on my life. Her influence serves as a powerful reminder that being a witness for Christ doesn't always require the grand, gestures of eloquent speeches. Instead, it can be found in the everyday moments where we choose to live authentically and share our faith through our actions and presence. Her lessons, Mrs. Billups' lessons, remind us that our witness can thrive even in solitude, that we should not wait for the perfect moment to share our gifts, and that God is continually using us to plant seeds in the lives of others, even when we are unaware of the impact they are, that we are making or that they're making. Her lessons remind us that our witness can thrive even in solitude, that we should not wait for the perfect moment to share our gifts, and that God is continually using us to plant seeds in the lives of others, even when we are unaware of the impact we are making. As we go forward, let us strive to be like Mrs. Billups, where we find ourselves in an empty, whether we find ourselves in an empty room or surrounded by a crowd. Let us sing our song, whatever is our song of life, whatever is our mission in life. Let's do it with passion and with purpose. Let us share what we have with others, knowing that even the smallest act of kindness can reflect the love of Christ. Walking through our struggles, okay, and holding on to Jesus's hand through them, it's not just for us. It's for those who will see Jesus through us, even if we never learn that they were watching, okay, and that their hearts were recording. I'm a witness to that, decades-long witness to that. So as we fulfill the call from Acts 8 to go forth, go ye, to be witnesses to the ends of the earth, remember your Mrs. Billups, and you do likewise. Mrs. Billups taught me everything I need to know, and we never, ever had a conversation. So I pray that these few words encourage you, okay, that they blessed you. Okay, thank you for joining us, and we hope you will join us next Wisdom Wednesday, okay? And if you need to reach us, we'd love to hear from you. The easiest way is through our website, and that's at www.ffiministries.com. Thank you for joining us. God bless you.